is living a condition in which a person of excellent character is living optimally well, flourishing, doing admirably, and steadily enjoying the best mindset that is available to human beings. That's quite a definition, isn't it? So this is what we're aiming for when we practice Stoicism. We want to steadily enjoy the best mindset that is available to human beings. This is what the positive affective state really looks like. And we'll come back to this definition in a moment. So how do we get there? Well, it's all about developing good judgment. When we talk about wisdom and virtue in Stoicism, it's about knowing what's important in life and applying this knowledge in all that we do. So we start with searching for the truth, and the truth leads us to make good choices and understand what's really important for our lives. It's all about values. And the Stoics had a theory of impressions. This is something that they are very well known for. Many of you probably know about impressions. I'm just going to briefly describe it for those of you who are not familiar. So an impression is a thought that has propositional content that occurs to a rational human being. So we're talking about adult humans here, not non-rational animals or human infants, for example. They wouldn't have these types of impressions that a rational adult does. So an impression is something that occurs to you and it causes you to act in some way. It has motivational content. So for example, you might be sitting at the dinner table and someone passes you a piece of delicious looking chocolate cake. You have an impression, I should eat this cake, right? So then we have a choice. Do we assent to this impression? And if you assent to the impression, that means you're saying, yes, this is something good for me to do. I think this is appropriate. This is good for me. I'm going to eat the chocolate cake. Now, obviously, you may not be spelling this all out for yourself. It happens instantaneously, but this is kind of the behind the scenes process that's going on. So if you assent to eat the chocolate cake, there you go, you're eating cake now, it's delicious. On the other hand, you may have reasons not to assent to that impression. You may be on a diet, you may just think it's not appropriate. Maybe you already had 2 pieces of chocolate cake, you're not going to eat a third one. Maybe the person sitting next to you didn't have any cake and you think it's more appropriate for that person to have the piece. Whatever the reason, if you do not assent to the impression, I should eat this chocolate cake, then automatically you do not eat it. You do not act on that impression. So our impressions really have a motivational force that causes us to act in one way or another based on our values. So what's important to us? What do we think based on all of our life experiences, based on our character, based on the circumstances here, because we know it can change sometimes based on the circumstances you're in, what is the right thing for me to do? This is what good judgment is all about. And our emotions follow from these judgments. So their emotions are so closely linked to judgments. Sometimes they were even defined as a species of judgment. Chrysippus said that emotions are a kind of judgment. So it's really closely linked to our judgments, which are in turn linked to our values, all closely connected. When we have correct judgments about the world, so when we judge that things external to us, things not in our control, are not as important as things that are in our control, our character, being an excellent person, these things are where our good lies. So when we have correct judgments about what's important in life, we have less negative emotion because we're not concerned about all those things that are not in our control and that are not good for us. So that automatically, when we have correct judgments, we have less negative emotion and we have a lot of room for those good emotions to come bubbling up. We have more space for those good positive things. So we're going to come back to this throughout the talk, but I just want to reiterate that our goal is not good emotions themselves in Stoicism. We're not targeting an emotion. What we're targeting is a judgment, or the matrix of judgments, I could say, good judgment in general that gives rise to the good emotions. If you try to target a good emotion itself, the ubiquitous search for happiness, for example, if you're targeting the emotion of happiness, you probably won't find it. It disappears when you try to get close to it, like the end of a rainbow. What we're targeting is the values and the judgments, those correct judgments, which in turn give rise to the good emotions. So this is a really important distinction to keep in mind. And again, as I said, we'll come back to that. So just to give you a little bit more information about bad versus good emotions, we just said that our emotions are based on our values and judgments. So the bad emotions, so-called, are based on mistaken judgments, things like distress, desire, fear. That's pretty obvious that those are bad emotions. You might be surprised to see delight on this list as well. However, delight is mistaken judgment. So you might feel a happy emotion, delight or gladness, but because it's based on a mistaken judgment, it's still considered a bad emotion. So for example, if someone passes you a piece of chocolate cake, you might feel delighted that you get to eat a piece of chocolate cake. But if it's not the right thing for you to do, then that is based on mistaken judgments. So it's still part of those bad emotions. And I should clarify that the Stoics thought only the sage would experience the good emotions, the eupathei. All the rest of us are lumped into this category of having mistaken judgment. And that's not to say that we can't sometimes act appropriately or use good judgment, but the Stoics had such a high bar for these good judgments. The sage is correct at all times about everything. The sage has perfect judgment at all times, and it's kind of like overlapping. Every correct judgment leads to every other correct judgment for the sage. So it's an extremely high bar. It's not something that we are probably going to achieve in our lives, but it is something for us to aim for. It's a compass. It sets us in the right direction so that we are aware of where we need to be, right? If we don't have anything to aim for, we're never going to get there for sure. So at least having a direction is good for us to have something to base our judgments on. Okay, so the good emotions, the ancient Stoics identified a few categories of good emotions, such as wish, joy, and caution. So these are things that the sage would experience. And I love especially some of the terms they used: goodwill, cherishing, enjoyment, cheerfulness. It's so positive. If you can imagine, for example, experiencing this type of goodwill towards people at all times, that would be amazing, right? And very positive, a very good affective experience. Caution would come when the sage would want to make sure that she doesn't make mistakes in the future. For example, she doesn't want to get, too carried away with herself and think that she would never make a mistake. So she wants to be cautious in that way. So again, the good emotions, the eupathei, are perfected and only experienced by the sage, but we can still aim for them. They are stable, consistent, and under our voluntary control. Now, this is important, under our voluntary control, because so often in the 21st century, we tend to think about emotions as things that happen to us. And of course, as Stoics, we know that this is not necessarily true. We don't want to just be reactive based on what's happening around us. And so the sage has perfected emotions to such an extent that they are completely under her voluntary control, and therefore they are stable. They don't need to change based on external factors or conditions. They're consistent. So you might say that they're actually more similar to an attitude or a mindset than a feeling. Certainly not the type of feeling that comes and goes. Oh, I'm eating chocolate cake, I'm so happy. Oh no, I got a flat tire today, I'm so sad, right? That's not what we're talking about here. It's a consistent attitude, a way of responding to the world, a way of experiencing the world. So we could call it a mindset that the sage is experiencing here. So if we ask the question, should we cultivate good emotions? It's a bit of a nuanced answer, no and yes. So no, once again, we're not trying to cultivate any type of emotion itself. What we're trying to do is cultivate the mindset or attitude behind these judgments. So in some ways, we're more likely to make good judgments if we cultivate a mindset, or you might consider it a predisposition. So Epictetus has a really interesting discourse 2:18, where he compares the building up of negative predispositions, and he compares it to getting a callus on your hand, which is really interesting because he says, when you give in to an incorrect judgment, for example, you think that money is so important that it's worth doing something against your character to achieve more money, for example. He says, every time you give in to that impression, every time you assent to that impression that money is the most important thing, you are not only making a judgment at that one time, you're also making a future judgment for yourself because you're creating your character for yourself. If it happens one time, it may not be that bad. Maybe the next time you're able to bring reason to bear against it and correct yourself. Okay, that's great. But if you give in one time, it makes you more likely to give in the next time, which makes you more likely to give in the next time. So it's like every time you're adding a layer, and pretty soon you have a callus or a predisposition towards being greedy or whatever the particular negative emotion is that you fall victim to. So if you often give way to anger, you'll become an angry person. You'll become irascible. That will be a part of your character. But on the other hand, and here I'm extrapolating from Epictetus's discourse, he focuses on the negative emotion, and I'm extrapolating to say, well, we can also apply that on the flip side towards the good emotions. So if you often give way to love, you'll become loving. If you often give way to cheerfulness, you'll become cheerful. You're cultivating that predisposition, that readiness to go in a certain direction and to repeat that same action. In today's terms, it's really interesting to think about it in terms of the connections in our brain. We know that every time you make a decision, you're strengthening that neural pathway, right? Every time you undertake a certain action, those mental connections are strengthened that make it easier for you to do that action in the future or to make that same judgment in the future. So this is how habits are formed, right? You get used to riding your bike, and pretty soon those pathways are so well trod in your brain that it becomes second nature to you. So this is what we're talking about here, but on an emotional level. You're making this become so second nature that it's part of your character and it becomes who you are. So it's really interesting to think about this contrast between giving way often to a negative character trait, such as anger or greed, or giving way to a positive one, such as love or cheerfulness. So in thinking about this in my own life, and as many of you may know, I'm above all a practitioner. I really try to look at some of these ancient concepts and figure out how to apply them in my own life. And so what I've thought about is using those three areas of the three Stoic disciplines, which were just mentioned a little while ago before I came on, logic, ethics, and physics, and just picking one kind of very positive mindset to cultivate from each of those. I figured that's a pretty good place to start, is to pick one from each. So for logic, I really looked at this in terms of respecting myself enough to learn the truth, to expect the truth, and to seek the truth in all of my own thoughts and in my interactions with the rest of the world. Ethics, of course, is dealing with other people. So I think the prime mindset is cherishing, learning to cherish others. Or at the very least, if you can't manage to cherish someone, at least wishing them well, so that goodwill. And for physics, this is our relationship with the wider world, a sense of welcoming. Marcus Aurelius talks about this a lot in his meditations. You want to welcome what happens to you. We're not talking about grudging acceptance here. Oh man, this happened, I guess I have to go with it. No, it's welcoming with open arms these things that are part of your life. If you can't get rid of them, welcome them into your life. And if we have time, if it's okay with the organizers, I have a brief guided meditation here. This is something I developed for my own practice, and I'd like to share it with you today. It should take about maybe 5 to 7 minutes. So I invite you all to sit in a comfortable position, if you're able to, if you're not already, and close your eyes or keep your eyes open and find something, find a point to gaze at. And focus your mind, first of all, on the phrase, I welcome. Turn over the word welcome in your mind. Envision yourself reaching out to welcome the new day, like welcoming an old friend or a new book. Review past welcomes you have given and received. Feel the warmth of those welcomes slowly filling your mind and then spreading throughout your body. Next, focus on the words, I cherish. What does cherishing feel like to you? Bring to mind a person you cherish, visualizing your cherishing as a light and positive energy you send outward to that person. Dwell on their good qualities and your affection for them. Now continue on to another person, then another, seeing the inner light radiating from yourself to each one. Next, turn your mind to respect. Consider how you respect yourself, first of all, as a human being. You are just as worthy of love, care, and respect as every human on the planet. You possess worth and dignity by virtue of being right here, right now. Show respect to yourself by striving for virtue and fulfillment in your life. Now consider how you respect yourself as an individual. What qualities within you are worthy of respect? Identify at least one moral quality you're proud of, and focus your mind and your breath on this quality. Now you're ready to carry this mindset of welcoming, cherishing, and respecting with you throughout the day. But this requires attention and noticing what your mind is doing. Whenever you experience a challenge or notice your mind going down the wrong path, hold one of these phrases in your mind. I welcome this. I cherish this. I respect this. When you encounter difficult circumstances, think to yourself, I welcome this. You can welcome this event as part of your life right now. When you encounter a difficult person, think to yourself, I cherish this person. You can cherish this person as a human while recognizing they might be misguided in their beliefs or actions. When an unhealthy thought arises in your mind, talk to it using the phrase, I respect this. You can respect this thought or this aspect of yourself as a part of your life right now. Then decide how to deal with it. If it's an untrue thought, one that does not accurately portray the world as it really is, eliminate it. Respect yourself enough to expect the truth from yourself. Notice your thought and acknowledge it with respect, not anger or frustration, then politely tell it to go away. Explain to your thought that it's not a true representation of the world, and therefore you can't accept it. With this attitude of welcoming, cherishing, and respecting, you can handle anything that happens today. All right, everyone, thank you so much for being here with me today. I really enjoyed sharing these thoughts on positive emotions, and feel free to reach out to me. I love hearing from people. You can find me at my website, stoicare.com, or reach me on Twitter. Or if you'd like, I have a book coming out soon, Journal Like a Stoic, and I'd be happy to talk about that as well. So if we have time for questions, Matt and Judy, I'm happy to take some.
Thank you so much, Brittany. I welcome the technological we had before. It meant that we actually introduced the best introduction to herself, really. If you've read her book Tranquility Parenting, obviously listening today, she presents the ideas so clearly, and I think the emphasis on practice is really welcome, and also on just reaching non-specialist audiences. So thank you so much, Brittany. And we do have, in fact, quite a bit of time, depending on your time. I do think people will have to come up though, in terms of getting Brittany to hear the questions. So if people are willing to do that, to come up, and there's a little device here that registers our input. I'm going to take a show of hands. First man I see is at the back. If you come forward, with apologies. Otherwise, I just don't think Brittany's going to count. Thanks, mate.
Thank you.
It's actually that.
Yeah. Thank you. So you talk about the bad emotions and the good emotions. When you talk about bad emotions, you talk about the delight, distress, desire, and the fear. But all these emotions are also natural to us. So why you call them bad emotions? That's I want to understand.
Okay, could you repeat the last two sentences? I had a hard time hearing.
Yeah, these emotions are also natural. It's part of us as a human beings, right? We experience delight, distress, desire, and fear sometimes. So they are all natural to us. So I want to understand why they are also called bad emotions. Maybe less optimal, but they are natural. Thank you.
Okay, so why are they called bad emotions if they're natural? That was the question?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Great question. So the Stoics are not looking at things that just occur to ordinary people. I think a lot of times psychologists today will say, okay, so how does the human brain work? And they'll just grab a few people, put them in a scanner, or do research with them and say, okay, so this is how people function. This is not what the Stoics were doing at all. This is not their project. They're not looking at the average person. We all know how we already function, right? We know how to live an average life. What we want to know is how to live an excellent life, how to find this flourishing, this deep, rich happiness. If you take the average person off the street, they're not going to have an answer for you. Or, I mean, they might have a response, but if you watch how they live, you're not going to see the evidence that they are flourishing, right? So we're not looking at what comes naturally as just what people happen to do. We're looking at natural as the very best of humanity. What is our capacity here? We're looking for the most excellent example of humanity. So this is where the idea of, okay, we're not just going to do what comes naturally, which means what comes automatically or easily. The Stoics have a different definition of natural, and it is what is our capacity? What is that highest capacity that we can all aim for? So their natural is the excellent human. That's what they're taking as natural. So from that, you can see why they have a different definition of everything, really, including good and bad emotions. So what comes natural is what the most excellent person, i.e. the sage, would be doing. Does that help clarify?
I think I have a nod, Brittany, so we'll go to the next question. I can see Nick. Do you want to come up?
Okay.
Yeah, just watch it.
Hi, Brittany. Thank you so much. I thought thanks for sharing your personal practice, and I think if we can really adapt that view, where as you say, if we can anything that comes to us, we first welcome it, be that a good thing or bad thing, we welcome it, and then we cherish it, even if it's a challenging thing. We cherish the opportunity to work on ourselves to be a stronger, better person. And my understanding of respecting is to, I guess, in whatever actions that we decided to take, every word and every action that we take, we respect ourselves and respect other people. So thanks for sharing that. Also, thanks for sharing your wonderful list of the mistaken judgment and correct judgment. And just my understanding of, for example, joy and cheerful is adapting that, developing that positive outlook in the world, and cherishing is like gratitude and goodwill is compassion. But what I don't understand is the caution. Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Could you repeat the question? I didn't quite hear it.
The last item in the list of correct judgment is caution, and I don't quite get that one. Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Okay, sure. Yeah, so this is actually a very technical concept. I didn't want to go too much into the technicalities. And by the way, I should mention that a lot of my talk today and a lot of the study on emotion in general in Stoicism is thanks to the amazing work of two scholars, Christopher Gill and Margaret Graver. So they have done a lot of the detective work of digging out some obscure references from the ancient sources and putting it all together. And I would highly recommend Margaret Graver's book. I have it right here with me, Stoicism and Emotion. It's an excellent book. It's pretty easily available on Amazon, I think. So if you're interested in digging into this topic more, definitely pick up a copy of this. So the ancient Stoics thought about caution. So the good emotions are only experienced by the sage, right? The sage already has perfect judgment. So she does not have to worry about anything bad happening to her in the present, because she knows that everything good is inside of her. So, even if something that a lot of people would consider terrible happens, she is still happy. The most famous example of this is the old saying that the sage is even happy on the rack. In other words, under torture, which seems very counterintuitive and very paradoxical to many of us in ancient times as well. But this means that the sage has everything good that they need inside them, and therefore they're always happy. They have that stable happiness. So they're not going to be distressed by anything that happens outside of them, but they do have this sense of caution towards future events, lest they inadvertently, become irrational for some reason. Now, this doesn't typically happen to the sage. Once you achieve this state, you would never go the other direction. But nevertheless, they would still have that caution to make sure that nothing happens to them in the future, that they don't make any incorrect judgments in the future. So that's where that idea of caution comes from for the sage. Now, for the rest of us, of course, we're not sages. So, it doesn't apply as much to us. We're working in that direction. But does that answer your question?
I'll look into the book. Thanks for the recommendation. But just to throw it in the mix, I guess, if I may present another way of looking at it from a more sort of Buddhism philosophy, is that maybe it's not only the sage that can feel it, but within each and every one of us, we already have the capacity to just sort of see things as the way they are and not having any judgment about them, and having this awareness, and not necessarily that we have to be a sage in order for us to have good judgment. So it just and I think, yeah, so it's that's why I'm still not quite sure what Stoicism mean by cautions in this case. And joy,
good wish and all that, yep, but not quite sure about caution, but I'll look into that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And just to follow up, yeah, this is an area where I think there is considerable overlap between Buddhism and Stoicism. I'm not a Buddhist scholar or anything like that, but yes, you're right that we're on the path to this. I think the Stoics talk a lot about the sage because, like I was saying before, the sage has perfected judgment in every area, which is not something that any of us have. We might have proper judgment in one area at one point in our lives, like passing up the chocolate cake. Okay, that's the right thing for me to do, for example. But at some point, I'm going to demonstrate that I don't have perfected judgment in every area. However, I do want to emphasize that this is a model for us to aim for, and we can get very close to it, right? So that's the whole reason we're here, is because Stoicism does help us get closer to this goal. We wouldn't be here, and I certainly wouldn't be here talking to you about it if there weren't the possibility of us making progress. So yes, we can make progress. And I love your phrase that each of us has the capacity to do this, because that is something that the ancient Stoics strongly believed in. They believed that we do all have an inborn capacity for virtue. If any of you happen to be attending Stoicon tomorrow, I will be speaking about that topic as well. So be sure to tune in for that. So thank you so much for raising those questions. And yeah, I hope that helps.
Thanks so much for sharing.
All right. Any other questions? I've got a couple of questions from the team, but I'm wanting to get people who aren't, first of all, if possible. I've got a hand up right at the back. The gentleman, if you could come forward, and then I've noticed there's another person here as well. So have those two questions, and then Roger and Judy, if you have time.
Speaking. Hi, Brittany. Thanks very much. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Really enjoyable. So my question is around, all of us in liberal democracies are, going through this time of turmoil, fractured societies, extreme views. I think a lot of us are trying to find ways to knit things together and think about the middle ground. But it's really hard, I find, for example, today I read an article in the Guardian newspaper. It's about actually somebody from your country, a politician in your country who was sitting through the impeachment trials, and the article's talking about how he was reading comic books rather than papers he should have been reading. So irrespective of, the outcome, I sense that sense of anger, this is wrong. And I start to think, well, a sprinkling of anger is maybe not a bad thing because it motivates me to think about taking some action. But equally, it's quite challenging. So I guess my question is, what would the sage do in that situation? Just sit back and relax and it's all good and just, let's have a bit of marijuana, or do you get on and sort of do something? Because either option seems to be problematic. So really looking forward to your thoughts on that.
Right. Yeah, thank you. This is a very, this question comes up a lot. And it was a big distinction between the ancient Stoics and, for example, Aristotle, who said, yeah, some anger is great. It motivates us to do things. And this is the argument that a lot of people use even today to say we need anger. The Stoics disagree. And I would recommend that you read Seneca's essay on anger, where he goes through a list of reasons why we need to eliminate anger, why anger is not good at any time. And it goes back to the idea of the passions being uncontrollable. Once you give in to a little bit of anger, it's a slippery slope. You're going to slide. And righteous anger, for example, a lot of times people bring this up, but anytime you're under the control of this emotion, you are not in control of yourself. And it's easy to make mistakes. A lot of people feel like they have the right on their side. They feel like they are the good people and they're battling people who are not good. And this is difficult. When you give into anger and you're under the control of an emotion, you cannot reason properly. You're misusing your reason. You're letting this anger trample over your reasoning abilities. So whenever that anger starts sprouting up, who's to say where it's going to stop? It's like running down a hill. You might say, oh, I can stop now, but you might keep tumbling down. So I would definitely recommend Seneca's essay. And I hope that answers your question, but that's how I look at it, is that even if you allow a little bit of anger to take over, you have allowed it to plant its seed in your mind, and you're no longer in full control of yourself. You're allowing yourself to be pulled around in that case.
Thanks, Brittany. Next question here.
Hi, thanks so much for your lecture. And I was just going back to the comment about Buddhism, and as I understand it, also not as a Buddhist scholar, non-attachment is a really central precept. Is that the same with the sages? Is it about not attaching to emotions, or is there another thread that might be more relevant?
Yeah, well, I tend to think of non-attachment, at least in the Stoic similar context, as not attaching yourself to external things. So that's why Stoics talk about preferred and dispreferred indifference. So we are still allowed to pursue, for example, security and health and money, those kinds of things, as long as we don't become too attached to them, as long as we recognize that our good does not lie in those things outside of ourselves. Our good lies within ourselves in the correct use of, for example, money. So money is a preferred, it's an indifferent. You can do good things with money. You can do very bad things with money. You know, you can fund a war in a neighboring country, or you can feed people with money. It depends on how you use it. The money in itself is not a good or a bad, but the use that people make of it is good or bad, to quote Epictetus. So non-attachment in a Stoic context, I would say, is we learn not to attach ourselves to these external things, and that we're focusing more on our inner virtue, the things that we can control. In the context of emotion, so for example, in my guided meditation, I was talking about, talking to your emotions and not being attached to those. I think you could argue that that's similar to Buddhism in a way. Marcus Aurelius, in his meditations, you see him talking to his emotions this way. And he says, go away. I'm not mad at you, only go away and leave me alone. So I think one difference, and again, I'm not a Buddhist practitioner, so I might have this a little bit incorrect, but in Buddhism, in Buddhist meditation, insight meditation, for example, you watch the thoughts as they arise in your mind and there's no judgment, you just let them go. In Stoicism, you can talk to your thoughts and you can say, hey, this is not the kind of thought that I want, so please leave, without anger, right? But you are aware that there's a certain mental pattern that you would prefer, and you are trying to achieve that. So in that way, there is more judgment than in insight meditation. Is that good?
Thanks, Brittany. I think we might just have time if we can keep you just for another 5 minutes, maybe. I think Roger's got a question, my colleague, or Judy, and then maybe that can be the last question.
Brittany, wonderful talk. Thank you very much. My question goes to impressions and the discipline of assent. Now, the discipline of assent, as you pointed out, you can assent to those impressions or not. You can decide whether you're going to accept them and whether you're going to act on them, which relates to choice. That does require a lot of mindfulness of your thoughts. How do you develop your own mindfulness so that you note the impressions so that you can decide whether to accept them or not? Was that question clear, Brittany?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I see spiritual exercises in terms of two broad categories. And of course, you have an expert on spiritual exercises in the room with you, Matt Sharp. But in my practice, I tend to think of them in two broad categories. So one are the preparatory exercises that I do, for example, in the morning when I wake up. I read my Epictetus, I do some journaling, I do some reflection, these kinds of preparation that we do, which, by the way, also includes what we're all doing here now, talking with each other, discussion, interacting with other people who are also on their path to virtue. That's a type of spiritual exercise as well. But like I was doing in my meditation, you've got to take it outside with you, right? It's not an armchair philosophy, it's a lived philosophy. And so to your question, you have to practice being aware of what your mind is doing. You have to apply yourself during the day. It's not something that we just do in the morning and evening and then forget about the rest of the day. You have to bring your attention. And of course, the Stoics had a term for this, prosike, vigilance or attention. Maybe you could think of it as mindfulness, where ultimately you've got to bring your thoughts back to what's going on in your own mind. Now, for me, in my experience, a lot of this happens after the fact. So I might do something and then a minute later or an hour later, whatever it is, I think, you know what? Maybe I should have done that a little bit differently. And then in my mind, I'm ready. The next time a similar situation arises, I can respond to that in the way that I would have preferred. So a lot of my learning is kind of after the fact. Some of it is before. Sometimes I'm aware of what I'm doing beforehand. And the more you practice, the more that awareness increases. I think at the beginning, it was really difficult. Obviously, with practice, with time, you're going to be able to do this more and more, so that all of your actions, you're thinking about this beforehand. But it's a long journey. You know, I'm still on my journey. I'm sure many of you are as well. So it's all about practice. It's about self-compassion, not getting upset when you make a mistake. We all make mistakes. I make mistakes. Everyone does. Zeno made mistakes too. None of the ancient Stoics claimed to be a sage, which is really interesting because there were some other ancient philosophies where the leaders did claim to be sages, such as Epicurus. But none of the ancient Stoics did, not Zeno, not Chrysippus, Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius. They were all aware of their own flaws and they continued to work. So definitely don't get frustrated with yourself. As long as you're able to try again, you know, don't give up, stay in there and keep at it, you will improve. Epictetus says that you will not find anyone, if he strives to make progress, you won't find anyone who does not make progress. You will. You just have to be patient with yourself, keep working on it, keep trying to devote your attention, and you will make progress.
Thank you very much, Brittany. It's a lovely way to end the session. I just want to recommend Brittany's 2 books that I know of, which are first Tranquility Parenting, which has been out for a little while, and that's an application of Stoicism to the experience of parenting. It's the first book of its kind. And I want to make sure I get this title right, Brittany, the new one. Is it the 90-Day Stoicism Journal? What's the exact title? There it is. There you go. Journal Like a Stoic, a 90-day Stoicism program. So look out for those books. And as we've seen this morning, Brittany's a wonderful guide and interlocutor for those of you who are interested in trying to make this philosophy real for you, as Brittany's saying, outside of your head and outside of the classroom, as it were, but in everyday life. So please join me in thanking Brittany for a wonderful first session.
Thank you so much.
It's time for a cup of tea.